Time Spiral Remastered is coming soon, and with it a huge selection of newer Magic art is getting an old frame makeover. But with nearly 3 decades of evolution built into the humble card frame, how do we as Magic players now look back at this nostalgic aesthetic? Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast. We talk about all things Magic flavor design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we're going to be talking about Time Spiral Remastered. But there's not much story or lore to go along with Time Spiral Remastered. So I think what we're going to be talking about instead of all that kind of business is the frames. Because they've brought back a lot of the old frames for some new cards, which is like the big selling gimmick of the set. And it's got a lot of people excited. And there's a lot of sort of chat about it, and a lot of sort of discourse about how Magic looks now versus how it used to look, and all this kind of business. And Nathan, you wanted to take a bit of a deeper look at some of the older frames and like how they relate to Magic in general. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think we mentioned we've talked a little bit before we start these episodes, and I know at some point you entrenched listeners probably know that we probably have mentioned borders before. In light of this specific circumstance of looking at how aesthetically that you can add flavor to cards, not just from a design from like the mechanics or the art. Like there is a design aesthetic that obviously back in the day maybe had more of an effect on how certain cards looked and felt. These days there is not only a homogenization to artwork as we've talked about, but there's also a very clear homogenization to card frame, right? They've been editing little bit by little bit over the years, and it's funny now that we've had a few big changes that we look back at, say, the Time Spiral Remastered and see a window to the past. Like a lot of the modern players that have only been playing for like the last couple of years, they might not have had access to these cards. They might not have it as ingrained as, say, my eyes look at these cards and they don't see something different to a Magic card because I grew up with this style. But it is very different to how cards look now. So we're going to pick apart a little bit of the positives, the negatives, the why they changed it, whether if we could ever maybe see a future where we go back to having a little bit more character to the cards outside of the vision, like the artwork and the text box. I don't think so. I think realistically there's a very obvious momentum going forwards, and with all of the alternate art styles and art frame styles that we've seen in Secret Lairs and showcase artworks, I think that's probably how they'll flex again and give specific sets border character, but back in the day they did it across all cards. So yeah, it's a good time to look at it because it's a stark comparison when you put the cards next to each other, so there's quite a lot to decode and pick apart.
Yeah, for sure. Just to make it really clear then for people who are listening and sort of what we're talking about, yes, this is technically another art episode, and I know some of our listeners are a little bit eye-rolling whenever we talk about specifically art, because we're an audio podcast. I have, just for listeners if they want to keep up, I have the Scryfall card gallery for Time Spiral Remastered, and it has a bunch of the alternate borders on there. I'll put the link in the description below, so you can just click that through, jump to where they've got all the alternate borders, which are the old frames that we're talking about. Also, just to clarify terminology, because, as you say, not everyone who listens to this podcast will be completely up on what we're talking about. I mean, obviously, everyone knows what the old frames look like, but if we're talking about frames, we might say the word borders, because even though it's a longer word, and it isn't factually accurate, borders, when you say, the old border, just seems to roll off the tongue a little bit better than old frame. I don't know why, it just does.
Yeah, fair enough.
The border is technically the black and the white border around the edge of the card, or gold,
right,
and silver.
exactly, or the silver or the gold, depending on what you're getting it from.
We're really not talking about borders today, so if we say borders, we mean frames. And if we say frames, we mean frames. Also, just so people kind of know about the sort of the 3 different generations of frame. You have the original frame, which went all the way from Magic's inception right up to 7th edition. In 8th edition, they changed it to what is known as the modern frame, because that was when the modern format started to kick in as well. And that went all the way up until M15. And then at M15, they changed the frame to what we know it today. So we've got 3 major generations of card frame. Generally speaking, you will know what these frames look like. If you're not sure, just have a quick look. Everything that we'll be talking about today will be pretty much relating to those frames, and especially as a lot of the art we're talking about today relates to art that's fairly recent, hopefully you won't get so lost on the fact that this is an audio podcast. It's funny when you asked me about this, because you pitched this idea as being an episode to me just after we did our last episode, and I didn't think I had many opinions about the old frames, I got to admit. When you were like, oh yeah, I think we should talk about this because it's Time Spiral, I was like, yeah, absolutely 100% agree. I think you'll be doing most of the chatting. But having since thought about it, I think I've got quite a lot of opinions, and I don't think some of them are opinions. I don't think some of it's going to be subjective. I think I know we loathe to use it, but I think today I might drop an objective bomb or two.
Well,
And if people want to fight me, they can fight me. But I think I have a few objective bombs.
well, I mean, there's a big reason why these changes have been made, right? It's not as if it was done on a whimsy. Okay, there is because I was going to say the disclaimer at the top, like, yeah, like, try, if you can, open up, even if it's like Mythic Explorer or something, where you can have all of the borders next to each other, and then you can see the more modern cards underneath. Like, there is changes that they made, and they made them for reasons, and clearly those reasons have now been reinforced. They haven't reverted back. Like, this is a look to the past. This isn't them going, oh, let's give it another go and see if it works. Like, they know that people like nostalgia, right? Everyone likes the pudding that their mum made when they were a kid, or that kid show that's absolutely diabolical now and you should never watch it again, Beyblade. But, you know, like,
I love Beyblade.
Same. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, you look at it now and I'm like, they're all just screaming at spinning tops. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, like, what I've put as the title, the working title, is Eat Your Crusts, because there is a lot of flavour in the borders of these. And I think that, especially from an aesthetic point of view, again, we're a flavour podcast that likes looking at the aesthetics. I think a lot of people will instinctively have reactions to things based on how their eyes pick them up. I mean, it's how marketing works, it's how advertising works, it's how everything kind of works in the world. So I don't think you're wrong to say there are objectively correct decisions to make if we're talking about things from making the game clearer, making the cards more easy to read, making the cards, the formatting more clear. Even things like the holographic that was added into the M15 frame to make sure that the rares had that extra bit of, okay, you can't go and fake it. Not that I think fake magic cards is actually a big thing, but it is one of these things of where it legitimizes the card a little bit more. And those kinds of things objectively are correct, I guess. I just said objectively and I guess, so that fucked it already. but yeah, I think the first and foremost question that I want to ask you, Andy, is, do you like old borders?
Yes, I do. I kind of feel like when you first asked me, and the reason I didn't have many opinions on them was maybe actually because I thought I didn't like the old borders, or the old frames. But I do. But here's the thing, and this is where I kind of feel like a lot of the conversation around it is maybe romanticized. And by the way, I don't think genuinely, I'm going to say a bunch of stuff that makes it sound like I'm being very combative. I actually don't think many people are calling genuinely for these frames to be brought back into Magic and to be used forever. But I see a lot of discourse on like social media or whatever, and people are excited, and far be it from me to yuck people's yum. But people use the words, these borders are just better. And here's the objective bomb. No, they're fucking not. They're just not. They're not better frames than what we have now. So, yeah, I do like them, but I like them in the same way that men's fashion in the 50s and 60s was better than men's fashion now. Like, yeah, men used to look smarter, and men used to have like better made clothes or whatever. But I don't want to go to work every day, come rain or shine, whether I'm working in a mine or an office, in a wool fucking suit with a necktie. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, they may have things that are more enjoyable, and they may have aspects to them that you really like.
They might be prettier or more colourful, but that doesn't make them, for the function, and this is the point, for the function of what a card frame should be, they aren't, as you say, they are not objectively better.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of utility that I guess you could put onto how a frame should be. If you're looking at it from a modern hindsight perspective, now that we have lots of different card games, now that we have lots of different ways to engage with card games, and it's not just Magic, it's, you know, it's Yu-Gi-Oh! And like Card Fight and Pokemon and all these different games or whatever. There are certain like criteria that I think you need in your game, and it's things like, does the game look uniform? Is it aesthetically pleasing? Can you read all of the text that's actually printed on the damn card?
You'd think that'd be important, right?
You'd think that'd be important. And there's a million more, and I'm sure many more that I wouldn't even think of if you gave me time to think about it. And unfortunately, the old frames kind of fail at some degree on all of those metrics, right? So no, those old frames aren't better. But here's the thing. Have I bought cards specifically because they're printing in an older frame? Yes. Have I bought cards that you can only find in old frames? Yes, and I've not like tried to get them altered or whatever else. And are there cards which I think if we were to reverse the time spiral thing, where we put older art onto a new card frame, are there artworks that I think just wouldn't work? And that's yes again. It has its place, like all of these things, because a lot of the work that was done for those old frame cards was done with those old frame cards in mind. Much like when we speak to artists who are doing cards for like the current era of Magic, like when we spoke to Elena Danner, they do things with their card art where they know what the frame is going to look like, especially in the era of showcase borders. They know what the frame is going to be, so they tailor their art to make those artworks fit with the border. And I'm sure it was done back in the day as well. So long story short, I do like the old frames. They're not objectively better. And I will have, if people want to fight me on Twitter about it, absolutely. This is one of the few things where I'm like, no, I will have a discussion with you as to why I think this is the case. And I'm absolutely 100% that I'm right. But they do have their place. And nostalgia is a big thing, as you say. It is
exactly.
a big thing.
That's the leading driving force of this, right? Was to, one, they wanted to remaster a set like that anyway, and it's a perfect set to have done so, because it was kind of like the reset point for old school to new school Magic players in terms of the storyline. It was the reset for the modern story arc, all that nonsense. And there is a little bit of, we're going to look at these with a little bit of a framing of planar shift, because planar shift kind of shows a potential flavor direction that 8th edition could have taken in terms of updating the border but keeping the individual color aesthetic for each frame, compared to what they did with 8th edition, which is homogenize everything, make everything a bit clearer. So we will look at the frame look at it through the lens of planar shift as what they could have done if they focused on the flavor side of frame instead of the functionality of the frame, which again is a question of what is the frame supposed to be there for. And realistically, the function is more important. Without the function, the cards would be a mess. With the flavor, okay, it's better to have the flavor. It's an additional, but if you don't have the base level met, then you can't fluff around with the icing if you haven't got a cake to put it on, you know? So if you are the kind of person that needs to have a visual aid, do also have like an access to, like, say, planar chaos cards, because we will talk about a couple of those going forwards as well, because I think it's relevant. But enough preamble. I think the way that I think we're going to do this is we're going to break down each colour. So we've got obviously white, blue, black, red, green. Then we'll look at gold cards. I nearly forgot about both artifacts and lands because I'm average at doing everything in my life, apparently. But we'll talk about each category, because the thing that I think primarily is really interesting about this is that each color had its own identity, whether that identity was bland and crap, or if that identity was massively enhancing that color and what it meant to have, you know, a black spell versus a blue spell. These are the kinds of ways we're going to break it down and look at what they did right, what we could have maybe looked at going forwards, and then the obvious things that didn't really work. And the funny thing is, even with the updated time shifted cards, they still have the same issues as the old time shifted cards. There's only one thing I think they did with Time Spiral Remastered that I think was good, and that's on certain artworks. They made they changed like how much it was highlighted, like whether it was oversaturated or not. Like weird side note, I didn't know what the Tarmogoyf artwork was until literally like last week. My idea of what the Tarmogoyf artwork was, I don't even know how to explain it, but it was, the face was in the face. But in the current, in the time shifted, in the Time Spiral Remastered artwork, they've highlighted the mandibles of its jaws just ever so slightly. That makes you understand where its face is. So little things like that, I think they have made changes to. Otherwise, they haven't messed around with it. They've just gone, look, cool. Let's take the format and then let's just splice the artwork and the text back onto it again. So starting with, unfortunately, what I think is probably the most boring and probably has the biggest issue is the white border.
Immediately disagree. It's not the worst one. But
okay,
we'll
good.
It's not the worst one.
Yeah, because I think the point, the overarching thing is going to be clarity versus character, right? Like whether or not you are adding flavor to it, or if you're detracting from the ease of what you see and how you understand the cards. So the white cards have a simple marble effect. Now, when I say a simple marble effect, I'm kind of overhyping it a little bit. I don't think the background has much texture or like much. I'll say, like, again, it'll just keep using the word flavor, but it doesn't seem to have. It doesn't denote much beyond, okay, cool, maybe it's marble.
Well, I don't even know if it is marble, because I say, so I've also had a lot of these old framed cards in my hands recently in paper, because I recently was sorting through a big box of Ice Age cards. So I've had these era frames in my hand, and I've looked at them like quite a lot recently, and I can't decide whether the white frames are marble or not, because they've got like it's almost like a scale. They're like snake scales.
I guess it's
If you
also
really
maybe
look
parchment.
hard at it, maybe it's parchment. I don't know. I think it's meant to be marble, but I just think they've got the marbling effect really weird.
Yeah, this is the thing is if you can identify what it is without it being deliberately ambiguous, did it do what it was supposed to do properly? And that's where I guess I feel like white maybe falls short out of all of the other ones. Again, we'll get to the other colours, but I think the white, again, that not knowing exactly what they were going for is an automatic inherent problem anyway. One of the things I do really like about old school text boxes is something that we don't. Again, it's something you have to look at like really closely compared to the modern frame. Is that they have an inlay effect. So for both the text box and for the artwork for white cards, there's this almost the way they've coloured the edges of the artwork. It almost looks like the artwork is sinking in. It's almost like the frame itself is as an aspect out, like it's one level out. Cthulhu, who we spoke to a while ago about, and he does this effect of where he separates all the layers of an artwork, separates them all out, and creates a nice 3D depth effect. It's almost like this is automatically applied, like, and especially with foiling, which I think is really important for old school cards, because they only foiled the border. It had this extra aspect of popping out a little bit. It made the artwork feel like you were having to look in and engage in and bring yourself in. And I think this is something that the old border did very well. White, I think, does it maybe second best out of all of the colours in terms of creating this zoom effect almost. But it is something that I think is really important is on old school cards that you don't see on modern day cards. Modern day cards, the frame comes out, but the bordering kind of comes out rather than inlaying down in and giving you depth depth into the card. It's kind of giving you depth out of the card. I don't know if that's does that sound right? Do you understand what I mean?
Sounds right. No, I do get what you mean. I think the big thing as well is that the frames on the old school cards are just take up more of the cardboard. They are more of a presence. This is one of the big sort of swings of whether you like these frames or not, is whether you think that the frames should be just as much as part of the aesthetic of the card as the artwork is, or indeed any other part of the card. One of the reasons I don't think that the old frames are maybe necessarily as efficient as the modern era or the M15 frames is because they take up such a large part of the card that your eye is drawn to the border just as much as the artwork or the text box, which is visually a lot, right? So I think that's part of it. Like the shadowing and the kind of depth of field of the frame definitely is more so than on the more modern frames. I think a large part of that is due to the space that they're working with.
The big elephant in the room with white cards, I think, is they really highlight the problem of having, which all old cards had, which is the text was written in white outside of the rules text box. So the creature type line and the card name. Basically, I'm looking at, I've got like two screens open here, and I've got an unzoomed version of the mirror entity, and I don't know that says mirror entity. The only reason I know that is because I know the cards. I don't fucking know what that says. I can barely see it on the zoomed in vanishing light. Yeah, like, who knows? Like, if you don't know what the card name's called.
So you don't know what the card name is. It's the card type and what card type it is, so you don't know that, and if you're working like with tribal synergies, whatever. Also, the artist name. The artist name is in white, and the power and toughness.
Power and toughness as well. You don't even know how big it is. You don't know it's a creature. You can't.
The card's artwork, half the card's text is the same color as the fucking border.
Yep.
What?
And this is why white's a big issue, I think, for this, is because obviously white and to a lesser extent blue, we'll get into this in a second, they suffer for this more than the other three colours. Black, red and green suffer from this in no way, shape or form. So to a degree, it's forgivable, but obviously you look and compare it to white cards, like this is very much clearly why they changed to black text, I think, because they understood that without going specifically and darkening the frame to be able to highlight the text, which is what they do with the planar shift card version for white cards, is that they darken the text boxes so you can actually read it slightly better. And I say slightly better, it is still slightly better. And if you can't, if the reading of the card isn't automatically yes, then I think you've made a mistake from a design point of view.
Yeah, for sure. It's just one of those weird things, isn't it, where you look at old, like, say, 70s and 80s films or whatever, where special effects aren't maybe as slick as modern films. And a big part of that is down to technology. Obviously, technology's gotten better, filmmaking's gotten better, and things that we consider realistic have kind of changed. But there are certain things that you see in particularly low-budget films where they'll have a special effect or a trick photography that just doesn't look like the thing they're trying to achieve. It's not that it looks like it, but it's poor, or it's not like they do it and you go, oh wow, it's amazing that they did that for the time. It just doesn't work. And I've always thought in my head, like, what made them keep that shot in or not try and change it or not try and fix it round? And the white text on a white border is like, they did this for years. This was a huge chunk of magic. Did no one go, shall we just change it up for this set? Because they changed the colour of the bloody border more than they changed the text box.
At no point did anyone say, sorry, what does that card say? Like, did no one at any point have, like, bad eyesight? Because, I mean, this is a big...
Of course they do, but of course they did, but, like, they just decided not to. I don't... Yeah. It's baffling. This is, it's one of the big issues with the white frames.
Another disclaimer as well is that I've heard a few people say that they're visually challenged, so they find it difficult to differentiate colours. Like, maybe they're not, say, colour blind, but their colour, like, the spectrum is a little bit different. And modern frame and modern coloration, I've seen multiple people say, caters to this much better. Imagine, like, I still think some people will struggle with certain color differentiations between, like, green and red, say. But looking back at, like, old school cards, they have no chance. Like, if you're slightly visually impaired, white cards are basically unreadable for you. And I think at that point, that alienating thing, if you can't read what the card is, then that's a big problem. I've put 3 options of banishing light on our, like, overview kind of page to look at. The time spiral the time shifted version, the version originally out in Theros, and then the one that came out in Theros Beyond Death, which had the edited frame where it cuts off at the bottom. And out of the 3 of them, I'm curious to think what you think instinctively looks best.
So we've got old school, we've got modern era, and we've got M15 for banishing light. I mean, to be honest with you, they all look fine. There's a big part of this whole discussion with the Time Spiral Remastered arts where they've chosen cards that are going to go into the older frames. And there's a whole big discussion, which I think probably best to do after we go through the colours, about what arts are appropriate for the old frames and which ones aren't. And I think Banishing Light is one of these artworks which it works across all of them. It is also biased towards me. Well, I came into the game at Return to Ravnica, which is when the modern era frames were still in use. So in my nostalgia brain, thinks that looks the best because it's a good way between the old border and the M15 frame. So fine, whatever. But functionally, I think that the M15 ones it's just cleaner. It's just cleaner.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue I have is that I think the artwork again, it was funny that you brought it up about modern to old school art style / direction, because it's something we'll talk about and I've mentioned kind of going forwards. But I think the artwork works really well in the old school border, but then because I think the artwork looks really well and I look down at the bottom of the page to see who it is that did the artwork and I can't see who it is, that automatically undermines it, you know? So I think, I'm very much in agreement of, if I'm comparing the 2 more modern borders, the 8th edition M15, I'm kind of in agreement with you, but I think that's just because my eyes have adjusted over time to that cleanness of it. But it's an interesting comparison. So what I think was interesting, and this is why I wanted to bring up the time planar shift cards, is because, as I said, in 8th edition they made a decision to update the border, to update the frame, to be more readable, to function better, and then the planar chaos cards, which are so color shifted cards, like things like Harmonize, used to be Concentrate, right? So an effect that can be in that color, that it's a bit of a bend, but because we're looking at an alternate dimension where they updated the frame in this direction, the frames themselves have a very different look to the 8th edition frame counterparts that they would have normally. They keep the white text, as I said earlier, but they darken the frame itself, like the frame behind the text box, which I think works really well. And then they change the actual frame itself. So instead of being this marbly effect, it's almost like this calciformy, kind of almost bony kind of look. And I've brought up Calciderm as the main card, mostly because Calcify was the first word that came to mind when I thought about the border. And I don't necessarily think it works and it helps. Mostly because I think it darkens too much, and I think the white cards should look quite light. I think they should feel white as opposed to yellow. And I also think it's maybe too busy, and this is where we start to... I think when they had this decision of, do we push for more or do we do less, I think that was probably where their decision came from, whereas the more you do, as you say, the more of the text, but the more of the card it takes up, the more that's going on within that, the busier the card looks and the more there is to digest. And I guess the more your brain has to try And maybe that on an instinctive level is something they don't want you to have to do too much of. You don't want your brain to have to fight to get the base level of the card. And I think...
Yeah, I mean, we'll just like remember when they did the Amonkhet showcase frames for the invocations and just how utter, what a clusterfuck that was. And
Right?
Some people like them.
Yeah.
So and with distance from it, I think a lot of people have thought, oh yeah, it's gotten better and now people don't hate those cards as much. But there was just so much going on with those that it was just absolutely ridiculous. Notice that on these time shifted cards that the artist name is now in black text.
Well, on the planar chaos one, yes, exactly. Yeah, they keep it for the. I don't know why they keep it for some and not for others. Again, this is maybe and this is a curiosity of why white text sometimes, you know. And I know they've used it in modern things, like say. I'm trying to think of a good example when they do like
Masters box toppers.
Masters box toppers, that's the one. So my Tevesh Sat that I got for Commander Legends is a really, really dark card, and it doesn't use white text. It's one of the few times I've ever been like, why haven't you used white text for once when it can work? And I think this is an example of, I think white text generally only works every now and again, and I think they're trying to stay away from it because it is different. It does require very certain circumstances to be appropriate. So yeah, again, it's white maybe gets the bad rap because I don't think it has a lot of character anyway, and it automatically has detraction from the fact that you can't read the fucking cards. So I think that was probably like I don't know what your worst one is going to be, but I think that the white's the worst for me for that regard. If it doesn't have a lot of character, the things it doesn't do the best, and the things it does worse, it does like really, really, really badly. So I think that was I think that's an easy one that they a clear an obvious reason as to why they updated. Moving to blue,
which is the worst one.
Okay, good. I'm glad this is. Had it been any of the others, I'd have been critical of your opinion.
No, the others are fine. Blue is garbage. Garbage.
Wow. Okay. Right. So blue has the same idea. It still has this dropped effect to the text box in the artwork. Similarly to white, I don't think it provides the same depth that I think red is the. This is me my objective point of view, that I think the red text box is the best out of all of them, because I think it delivers on what it's supposed to deliver best without any variation, and also being clear as well as I just like it. But the thing about blue is that it has the busiest border out of all of them. It has a blue effect. It almost has this kind of almost like purpley, like dark blue or indigo-y kind of colours, like almost like oil effects swirled through, and it creates this kind of liquid, like watery kind of aspect to it.
I think the term you're looking for, Nathan, is 90s bollocks.
Oh, I love it. Well, the problem this has, though, is because it's one of the few ones that has like a distinctive variation in the frame. The fact it has multiple different colours within it is quite busy, and because it has highlights and lowlights, the highlights again make the text quite hard to read. I'm looking at, say, True Name Nemesis here, and again from a little bit of distance, the lowlights and the highlights, the bits that are lighter and have more white in them, they fade away the text again. Like the artist doesn't stick out, the creature typing doesn't stick out, and the name doesn't stick out. So I think the border
breaks up the text so much that you can't read it, which is crazy. Look, I'm going in quite hard on this border now because I do think it's the worst one out of the 5. This isn't the objective opinion. The objective opinion is that old frames in general are worse than new ones. This is a personal one, and I will say that I have bought cards in this frame. There's a white bordered counterspell, which has it's the meditation guy with the very sort of like LSD psychedelic artwork on it. I can't remember which counterspell printing it is. I can't remember the artist. But that's in the old frame. I'm looking at things like Muldrifter and Ponder and Paradoxical Outcome, all cards which I play in my decks. I will probably pick up a few of these in the older frame, in this new Time Spiral Remastered. But again, to use another metaphor, because I think it's a simple way to do it, it's the same way that when you buy like kitschy furniture or like a lamp that is just absolutely hideous that you have to have it. Like, I love grandmother like furniture. By that I mean I want lampshades which are like knitted with tassels.
Fantastic.
I love it. Is it good looking? No, but there's a part of your brain which goes, I find that aesthetic because of those aspects of it. So yes, obviously these borders have fans, otherwise they wouldn't do it. I'm a fan of some of these borders, but yeah, it's for its function. I mean, what is it? It's not a water effect.
It's oil. It's that oil effect on the edge of a puddle, right? And you get that kind of weird glistening effect. Yeah, I don't know what it's really going for.
This podcast can't just end up you being like, here are the facts, and me going, nah, it's rubbish, like it has just been for the past like half an hour. But I just, it's an interesting one. When we start talking more about the visual style of these frames versus the artwork and as a whole, like collection, I think my opinions have become a little bit clearer. Oh, pardon me. But for now, yeah, very strange. Anyway, carry on.
I think this is a really good example of where I like the character of the frame, but I feel like it needed a text box around. I guess also we have a disclaimer. So modern frames have a distinctive text box around the name of the card, around the name of the creature typing, and around the power and toughness. Old school cards didn't have this, which I think also adds to how the text gets lost, how they don't read very well. If all the white cards had like a box around them, I feel like it would be better, and that's why I feel like the planar shifted version of the white card is a step in the right direction, but I just don't think I think having done that, they clearly saw it wasn't enough. With say blue planar shifted cards, say something like Piracy Charm, what I love about them is that the planar shifted cards not only added character to the frame, but they also added character to the text box itself. And the text box for blue planar shifted cards is a water droplet effect. So it's almost like a little drop, and it has little wave ripples going around in a circle. Now, to me, that's really interesting, because it's almost like as the text was added to the card, it created a ripple, and then they managed, and that still was in the printing. Notably, they detracted from this weird oily, purpley, indigo-y swirliness to just being this almost like light reflecting off water effect, which I think works infinitely better. And it actually is still very similar to the current frame that we see, of where blue cards still have these slight white highlights of where it looks like there is maybe light reflecting off of water, because there's a water droplet in the mana symbol.
Yeah,
obviously
it actually looks like water.
Yes,
it actually looks like water, and not like someone's dipped a paintbrush in a
that's
glass of water to.
It's that ink effect when they put ink on that little leaf and it goes jetting across the top of the water. That's the kind of effect it looks like. Yes, good. That put my mind at ease a little bit. So yeah, I guess like from a subjective point of view, I like the fact they try to do more character. And for the frame, from an objective point of view, it is maybe too busy, and it detracts from the simplicity and the readability of the card, which I think is where flavor versus function. This is where it's really important. If you don't get the function, fuck the flavor. It doesn't matter what it tastes like if you can't eat it. So moving on to what I think is probably the best out of all of them in terms of what I think full aesthetic, black cards. And now black cards had a bubbling potion-like effect to their frame, of where it looked like a bubbling muck, like a potion that was being brewed. I think it sells the colour really, really well without overcomplicating it like the blue one does. It doesn't add in a whole other colour to it. It's also very much, and you'll love this, Andy, it's not like with the Liliana cards, it's not purple. There's no fucking purple involved. It's just black and white. And I think the big other thing about black cards, and the other two, white and blue, haven't done this, but black does, and that's it changes the text box completely. It is parchment effect, like a beige parchment effect that has like faded non-conformed edges to it, like it's been ripped out of a spell book. And I think that's the kind of thing that's missing on, say, white and blue cards, because it's an extra added aesthetic that almost is like, okay, this is what a black card should look like, but this is the kind of place that you would find a black card. You would find it as a scrap out of a spell book. Like that's where the spell dismember comes from. Like that to me, I think sells it. And it's interesting because where the white and blue cards, the way that the framing kind of drops the text box down into the card, adding this parchment effect is lifting it up towards you. And all I've put in here is, I haven't actively in my hand had an old school foil black card, and I'd be interested to see how they look with the parchment effect and whether or not I would like it more or less. Like, having seen plenty of foiled, say, red cards in the old border, the fact they only foil the edges and they leave the artwork, it does create an automatic layering effect. I'd be interested to see how it works with the black cards. So that's one thing I'm looking forward to try and getting out of Time Spiral Remastered, is I'll get a couple of the cheaper cards in foil just for a point of comparison, because I think it's interesting to see, even if they will turn to Pringles within a couple of days, because WotC doesn't know how to print cards properly.
I mean, to be fair, like on that issue, just to jump in, because I want to make a lot of people on stateside jealous, the European printings of cards, whilst not perfect, are way better than what the American stock is. I don't know why. I think it's just different factories doing different things. But yeah, I will say I don't think we've had half as much issue.
Yeah, we don't get it as bad. No, for sure.
No. So, yeah.
Amazing. But yeah, so I think black does the perfect thing of doing what blue tried to do, which is adding character to the card, because white didn't try at all. But it also added this whole extra aspect with the text box being different. And when you look at them side by side, it does make them stand out more. The black cards and the green cards, spoiler alert for like in 10 minutes time when we talk about them, green does this as well, slightly differently. And they do stand out more than the other colours. And I think it's maybe a shame that they didn't try and do something like this with the other ones. What makes green and black need parchment, whereas the other ones don't? You know, if anything, blue, the academical color, probably should have had parchment as well, right? Or maybe all of them should have had parchment because they're all spells out of spell books, right? So that's where my curiosity comes out, because I think it works really well for black, but it just adds extra disappointment that they didn't try and apply this effect to all of the colors.
Interesting. We will get on to it. I have, unsurprisingly, further opinions on this, but your point is very valid. But when we start talking more about aesthetics in a broader sense, I'll be happy to smash your dreams.
Sure, that's fine. And then looking then at planar, the planar shifted one, how they updated it again. They added a text box border, so the white text pops a little bit more. They took away the parchment effect for the text box. They made it so they homogenized all the text boxes, so they don't have their individual character, but they do have an effect on them. The blue one, as I said, the water droplet. The black one just has kind of like smudges on it, like it's a little bit dirty. And I think this is where Planar Chaos kind of showed, if anything, I think the black cards look clearer and look quote unquote better. Like, sorry, yeah, I'm doing the air quotes. Look better from a functionality point of view, but from a flavor point of view, they just look so bland and crap.
I think it's because I think you're right, and I think that's because with the planar shifted cards, when they highlight the creature typing or the card typing and the name of the card, those like mini text boxes are a lighter color than the rest of the card. I think that works because it's black, right?
Yeah, so monochromatic.
The fact they flipped it round, so the black pops in a way that it wouldn't have been able to do if it was homogenized the same way that the other ones were. I think if they did this on modern era cards, I think it'd be quite cool. I think maybe it would look weird because it was the only one that did it, but I also wouldn't hate it.
Yeah, I think they could be they can play with modern effects with the white, right. And again, this is why I was really annoyed about the Teffish Sacks. I was like, well, this is clearly where you should have done this, because you've been doing it for, like, say, the Godzilla, not the Godzilla, the comic book style ones for Ikoria, like, and that really, really worked because the colors were really harsh, really saturated, quite dark, and it worked really well. Another really interesting little point is go and look at not you right now, but whoever as you're listening, go and look up the original printing of Dismember. Yes, they've updated the artwork, which, by the way, is fantastic. I'm glad they did that. But the Phyrexia mana symbol on the time shifted cards look so much better than the old ones. The old ones looked really weird and clunky. They were slightly bigger than a normal mana symbol. There was something about them that really irked me about original Phyrexia mana symbols, beyond the fact that it breaks the game in half. And I'm glad that they have now fixed that. It's one of the few things that they've actually changed, because obviously none of the old school border had Phyrexia mana, and I'm glad that they updated the mana symbol for it. It's just a very, very slight, small thing that my aesthetic mind really noticed, and I think it does make a big difference on cards like that. Like, I actively don't like the way that they do it on the modern Dismember, so I'm going to time shift all of mine because I think it looks nicer and the artwork's better. Obviously, that's subjective, but it is an interesting point, because I didn't expect them to update things. I expected them to just transfer everything over. So it shows they have, cared enough to put some effort into going, okay, cool, like let's update some things that maybe didn't look so good.
Yeah, for sure.
Moving on to red. Now, red's probably like the most like, I don't want to say boring, because white is still quite boring as well, but it doesn't do a lot. It's got a simple cracked stone texture effect, comparative to the planar shifted version, where they took this to the nth degree and the entire thing looks like it's about to crumble away in your hands. If you look at, say, like a card like Brute Force compared to any of the time shifted cards, you'll see the difference in the amount of cracking there is in the card frame, which I like, because that idea of rocks, mountains, fair enough, cool, yep, nice typicality to red cards. But the thing I like about red is the color palette really complements this sinking in effect of the text box that I talked about earlier. Both the text box and the artwork have, I don't know why it works better with red. I think it's just because the light pink and the burgundy colors maybe pop a little bit more. You notice the depth on the text boxes for the red cards a little bit more, and it's one of the things I really like. I love this idea of natural 3D effects. Again, talking about how Cthulhu does this and pushes it in an actual physical way. If you can do it on a flat thing, then that's actually really impressive as well. The part that this kind of brings us to, which I know you maybe wanted to talk about a little bit later, but I have Molten Rain and Exquisite Firecraft pulled up side by side, because they both hearken from very different times of Magic, and they've both got the same border. Now, do you think Exquisite Firecraft looks weird in the old border compared to Molten Rain?
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Right?
So really Exquisite Firecraft is the artwork by Chase Stone, where it's Chandra whizzing a bunch of different like embers around her. So it's like she's controlling the fire and it's whizzing around her. She's firebending. Yeah. Molten Rain is the Hugh Jameson artwork, where it's like a meteor shower hitting a lake and it's destroying things and whatever. The art styles is really what's important here. So Chase Stone is an artist that utilizes light and color hues and a bunch of obviously different very technical things to create fantasy realist artworks, which involve a lot of like energy effects, fire effects, sparks, flame, like mana bursts, all this kind of stuff. And you see it across their portfolio. And he's so good at it that it's almost like it's 3D special effects. Like, obviously, yes, it might be working digital. I don't know if he works traditional or digital, but it's the kind of thing where it's almost like someone took a still from like a sci-fi film.
Yeah, how do you draw that? My brain doesn't understand how you can draw that. It's so impressive.
So many artists don't know how you do that. Like, it's really incredible. Chase is a fantastic artist. I'd love to get him on. Molten Rain is a lot more illustrative. It's a lot flatter, and it's a lot more like what you would kind of say is like traditional fantasy artwork. That's not to its detriment. It absolutely works for what it does. And this is kind of my point when it comes to art direction and art style with these borders, because it is a good like kind of point to pick it up on, is that the frames are so stylized in what they're trying to portray, and the fact that they are of an art style themselves, that if you try and put different artworks onto these frames, and it's not just the Time Spiral Remastered where we've put new artworks onto older frames. It was also at the time, because art direction all the way up until the modern era was incredibly diverse. Like, look at Ice Age. I mentioned Ice Age earlier. Ice Age is a set which has Lashrak's sigil and Goblin Snowmen in the same fucking set.
Like, I always forget that's a legitimate card.
Bonkers.
It's stupid.
It's bonkers. Like, if you just look across the whole set, like card design wise, like as a playing set and as a visual set, there I don't think you'd be hard pressed to argue that another set in Magic is more disparate than Ice Age. But yeah, just check it out. So there's a reason that artworks have evolved, and they've evolved at the same pace that the frames have, because there's overall zeitgeist aesthetic, there's what people want in their games in general. It goes back to that thing again where we know that artists work to their frames because they understand that that's the canvas they have to work with, essentially. And techniques have gotten better, blah, 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 all these different things. And I think for most part, if you were to go onto the Scryfall gallery, which I'm going to put in the description, and look at all the different artworks that they put onto old frames that didn't originally have frames, I'd say 80% of them have been picked very well, and they've been very careful to choose artworks which complement the frames and look good in what they're doing. Sometimes they have a hard time working with what they have, and we'll get to that later because more opinions, but some of them are just weird, and Exquisite Firecraft is one of those ones.
Yeah.
And the reason I think that's an issue, because you could just turn around and say, well, Andy, if people know that they have those old frames, then they would work to the frames like they always did, which is fairly valid. But the reason I think that's an issue nowadays is because we as players and the people who make the cards expect the game to look a certain way. And they expect the game to evolve over time to keep up with people's opinions. If you were to, in theory, bring these old frames back, the game would look like garbage because it just wouldn't be evolving at the same pace. And if people were forced to have a card game that never evolved and just stay stunted in older art styles, and let's be real, some of the older artworks, as much as a lot of them have nostalgic value, as much as many of them that were done traditionally have great aesthetic worth, some of them were just bad. And I'm sorry, artists, I won't name names, but some of those cards look awful.
Yeah.
I just don't see how you could think that modern Magic needs these card frames. Obviously, and this isn't to say that they shouldn't do Time Spiral Remastered. There's so much love for this set, and whilst it's not for me specifically, so many people are having such a whale of a time with this set. They love seeing the older cards. Some of the older cards, frankly, do look a little bit better in the older frames. Like, there are exceptions that prove the rule. But I think a big thing which you also need to realize is there's quite a large voice in the community that are saying exactly what I'm saying, which is, I'm glad it's here. It's not for me. And you don't usually get that with sets. Usually with sets, it's all in or nothing. Like, people really love it, or they really don't. And the fact that this is being like a little bit lukewarm with some people whilst being really powerful with others may be better in the long run. But yeah, I think it just goes to show that.
It's a good example for Time Spiral in general. When the original block came out, they tried to do this thing of where they made complicated cards that were throwbacks. And again, the hit and miss aspect of it was quite varied because it's really hard to hit everyone's nostalgia with one set. Like, you can't possibly do that. And I think I think you hit the nail on the head. It's funny that certain cards, like say Atali, I wouldn't have questioned if that was an old. I can tell that there's no way you drew that in 1995. Like that's you didn't. But it also it doesn't look wrong to me. And I think it's funny that out of all of the cards that are out, I mean, again, that's still on the edge of Exquisite Firecraft side of where I don't think it works. I just don't think it. I wouldn't automatically question it, but the more I look at it, the more I'm like, actually, yeah, like Relentless Rats makes way more sense. But yeah, so Exquisite Firecraft was, I think, the worst offender, just because it was such a disparity between what we expect from the artwork and then what we expect from the frame, which again, maybe that's because we're tailored and that's our experience. Like, for example, when we saw the Wayne Reynolds doubling season, that actively felt like an old school card getting updated, because that art style you just don't see in the modern frame anymore. And in the same fashion here, we're seeing a new art style in an old frame, and there is just there's a slight disconnect. And again, if you're a big company making cards for millions upon millions of players and the average person has a disconnect, then that's something you need to fix. And I think it's an interesting, again, this was the only reason I put Exquisite Firecraft. It was the only time that I think out of all of these that my brain really, really went, oh, does that look right? And I'm glad that, you agree with me to extent, because I think there is an objectivity you can have here with those things. And I think it is exactly as you say, an expectation for what we want our game to be developing like, and how those cards are communicated, and how the artworks are being celebrated and shown. And this card clearly wasn't made to be in an old frame. And now it's in an old frame. Yes, okay, there might be a bit of a difference.
I mean, some of them look great. Like, you have like a Lava Spike, Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker looks great. But then on the flip side, straight away, just literally on the same line of cards I'm looking at, I'm not a huge fan of Monastery Swift Spear. I'm not a huge fan of Atali. If I'm honest with you, I didn't think looked good in the old frame. So yeah, Liliana's Triumph is a black instant. Looks strange, man. But then Shriekmaw
looks great.
Look at the card Shriekmaw. I can't believe that wasn't in a black version.
Right, exactly, yeah. And this is the thing, it's funny because it's really difficult, again, when you do something, and it's not like they went, each individual card has its own individual thing, like, not with like showcases like, say, Eldraine, where they go, right, this is the frame, this is the aesthetic we want, and all of the artists, some of them changed and did artwork that we would have never have seen from that artist had they not had the opportunity to do it in the showcase frame. Whereas they've not created any new artworks for this. They've obviously just hand selected a bunch of cards that they thought were appropriate for whatever reason, whatever arbitrary reason they thought. Like, I'm surprised by a card like Paradoxical Outcome, because it reads like a kind of card that would have been printed back in the day. And again, we'll come on to this when we get to green cards in a second. I think there's a couple of winks and nudges that they've put into the old framing, like, say, Laboratory Maniac, or whether or not you're playing cards that are like corporate only or legacy only kind of cards that, okay, it's nice to have people scramble to get the play set of them. But I think there are certain cards that I think are a nice wink and nudge to going, yeah, this is how we used to make cards, so we're going to put it in an old kind of school frame for you. But yeah, there is definitely a conversation there as to whether or not cards are appropriate to the modern framing compared to the old framing. Where that line is obviously person to person, but there is definitely, I think, an objective line there somewhere. So moving on to green, the last of our colours. The thing I really like about green is that it does a similar thing that the black does, that its text box is parchment. The slight difference in this is that the parchment doesn't have as much fraying at the edges. It's a little bit crisper. It looks a bit more taut. So instead of it looking like it was a single sheet that's faded and got mottled over time, it looks like it's directly been torn.
Well, it's interesting. I read the text box for green as being more like a wooden board that's been sort of broken at the sides.
Oh, interesting. Let me go in. Oh, I see. Actually, yeah. No, the more I look at it, you do have almost like a timber effect, right? There are actually grains to it. There is a bit of grain to it. Yeah. Okay, that makes a bit more sense. Yeah, because obviously they wouldn't be writing necessarily on parchment; they'd be writing on bark or something, right? That does make a bit more sense. Yeah. No, I like that. Okay, good. Well read. I like that. The thing that I don't like about green cards is that the actual frame itself has very little character. Comparing that directly again to the planar shifted version, again, the idea of if they updated the cards to be flavor dependent rather than function dependent, the frame around the outside has a leaf effect. Like, you can almost see the veins of the leaves that you get, when you're a kid and you draw a leaf and it just do one line down the middle and then lines coming off of it. Like, it goes into it. You can see, I guess it's capillaries almost. Is it capillaries in leaves? I think so. But in the text box itself, you've got this wood effect of where it's almost like the rings. If you were to cut a log, and obviously you have all the rings for how old it is, that's in there. Again, this is a really good example of where I think it's nice to see them try and build the flavor of the color into the cards themselves. I don't think it's too much on the green cards whatsoever. I don't think it detracts from the card at all. I think it informs the color of kind of what it is. Yes, okay, it's nature. That's not exactly complicated, but I think it does deliver without being too gaudy, too much. So I think it's a shame that we didn't necessarily see that carry on. Again, compared to the old school frame, I don't know what they were going for. It's just kind of greeny, mottly kind of color. Like,
Yeah.
cool. Like, that's not, again, it's very inoffensive. Again, the colors are dark enough that the white doesn't look wrong. You can actually read the artist's name. So I have very little bad to say about green. I think, again, I like the parchment effect or the wood effect, I guess, and the parchment effect for black, because I think it defines them quite, and it gives them some distinction. Whereas the other three colors, yes, red does it well with their text box. I think they could have done something different or something new. What I love is the fact they chose something like Beast Within, which is definitely the kind of card they would have made back in the day that they wouldn't made now, even though they made it more recently. Because I know that Mario said it's a big like color break. It's one of the cards that he thinks is a mistake, like with Mentor of the Week, which makes no sense. Why draw cards? Come on, let's go. But Beast Within definitely feels like the kind of card they nodded and went, yeah, we would have made that kind of thing. Like, in the old school cards, like Sinkholes, 2-mana destroyer lands. Like, yeah, we'd have made Beast Within back in the day. It makes a creature, right? That's a green card. Doesn't matter that it destroys lands and destroys creatures in green. Like, no, fuck it, doesn't matter. Like, it makes a dude. So I think that's almost like one of those wink nudge nudge kind of moments that I kind of thought was really really enjoyable.
Yeah, for sure.
So because I didn't have much bad to say about green, obviously we move on quite quickly. We always talk more when we have things that we don't like about things, which is great, obviously. But we're moving on to something that I really don't like, and that's the gold cards. Now this might split opinions, but I've put it's the outlying ugly duckling, and that's saying it's an outlying ugly duckling, including how I match. I don't like the white and the blue. Well, you don't like the blue cards, but as much as I don't like the white cards, like this is still that much worse. I think it's oddly lacking in any flavor. I then will come. I'm going to go through my train of thought because I found a bit of a fact that kind of made me rethink that a little bit. So I think it's oddly lacking any flavor. I think the coloration's really insipid. It's almost like beigey. It's like a brownie kind of color. They say it's gold. I think it's more. Compare it to like the modern coloration. It feels really muted and really outdated. I think it has similar ease of reading problems because again it has highlights and lowlights. The highlights drown the coloring because a lot of gold cards are like say legends and things like that have long names, long type lines. You can't really read it. The only good thing is it's a bit darker at the bottom where the artist is, so you do get to see the artist's name typically, but say for example in the one that we've shown here, Slimefoot the Stowaway, can't really quite read it properly. The Fungus, it's not so easy to read, and again I've got pretty good eyesight. For someone who's more struggling to be able to read cards, these are going to be difficult, right? You're going to lose a lot of the text for it. And then the other thing I think is something that's really great is that they did with modern boards that they didn't do back then is that they don't have any color indication whatsoever. They only introduced this idea of adding the colors if it's a 2-color card, 3-color, 4-color, 5-color, which is a big problem. Don't get any differentiation. That's just gold all the way. Like cool, fine, whatever. But with 2-color cards, you do get this framing of where it's black on the left-hand side, green on the right-hand side. They introduced this in with Ravnica, obviously the OG Ravnica, because guilds were coming in. So it was a nice way to do 2-color set and then add this border effect to it to kind of make them pop a little bit more, which it does. Functionally, they pop more. It looks more like a black and green card. It doesn't just look like some weird beigey gold card, And I found out going through some research, the reason why they did this, when they introduced this gold coloring was with Legends. So when the Elder Dragons all came in and all those random 6/4 for 7 for like 6 blue white, and it just doesn't have any other ability. Like all of the weird fucking Legends from Legends all had this gold coloration effect to it. So it's almost like gilding the way I looked at it. It's like, okay, these really cool legends of time, and we're going to gild their cards and give them this gold border to make them feel more regal, more royal, worth more. I just think that it probably could have done with being a little bit shinier and a little less like someone's got some sloppy diarrhea.
Yeah, it looks like the kind of effect that when you used to do clip art on Word in like the early 2000s, and you'd make like a really cool graphic like for the title of your essay in school, and then you put a weird color on top of it. That's what it looks like.
And I don't think it's necessarily a problem, but looking back, I just think it's funny that I don't think any of the cards, and again, fight me, it's a really big thing to say, I don't think any of the cards look better with the old border.
No, I agree.
It's interesting to see Abrupt Decay and Bloodbraid Elf, and sorry, does that say Consuming Aberration? I can't tell because the border tells out the words. Who even knows what it says? But I don't think it makes any of them look better. And again, that is quite subjective. But I think objectively, I don't think the cards overall are clearer. I don't think they are better representing what they are. There is no, again, they don't have this parchment effect. There's nothing to it that makes it stand out as a distinctive. It's just a weird kind of color palette that mutes the wording, and I don't think it highlights or enforces any of the artworks. I think the only one I think I really like it on is Mortify, because Mortify's artwork itself has this weird motley effect, so it kind of works for it. With other cards like Epic Experiment, you compare the Epic Experiment from the remastered compared to the normal card, and it's night and day. Like, it looks so much better in the modern border. And again, maybe that's subjective, but I don't think it is. I just don't think, what is the old border adding to that card? What is it? How is it elevating it? How is it building it up? And yeah, the more I stare at this weird collection of browny yellowness, the less I like it.
I agree.
Yeah. Again, maybe that's too harsh an opinion, but it's mine.
No,
I'm sticking to it.
It's not a harsh opinion. It's a correct opinion.
So now we're gonna. Well, yeah. Again, I agree. Like, there's something about it, and I'd like to see what other people who disagree with us and they think it in a positive fashion. I'd like to see kind of what their justifications are, because maybe I'm missing something. Who knows? Moving on to what I think is really an interesting one. I don't know how I nearly forgot to include artifacts, because we're now moving into the legacy of Mono Brown. Now, Mono Brown decks won't mean anything to the modern player because no cards are brown. But back in the day, all artifacts were in this kind of dark, not beige because that's the weird gold color, but this brown metallic-y kind of effect. I say metallic-y because it's more like rusted metal rather than being shiny, sheeny metal that we've got. And my question to you, Andy, as well, I've obviously got cards like Solemn Simulacrum and Panharmonicon up. Do they feel more like artifacts in the brown border, or do you think they look more like artifacts with the grey border that came in with Mirrodin?
I mean, I think it's fine. Out of all the borders, this is the most evocative to me of what the card physically is meant to be. If you were to take it from the metagame perspective of what other game pieces actually representing, and artifacts from, like, Magic's past or whatever, these kind of work. I think they only work, though, and I kind of do feel this, is that they only work to us looking at the sheets of the cards now and us going, oh, I guess it is a rusted thing, and those are old artifacts, because they're a novelty, that we're looking at them and going, oh, they've got this kind of older quality to them. And I don't dislike brown artifacts at all. I think some cards do look better in it. Like Cranial Placing, for example, is one of the cards that they put in the old border. I think it looks absolutely fantastic in the old border. Something like Crystal Shard or Everflowing Chalice or even Panharmonicon, I don't think they're kind of fit for purpose, because what those cards are meant to be are a lot more like shining new technologies. Do you know what I mean? Like Vanquish's banner in the old border, it's a flag, and as much as you could argue, well, how is that an artifact at all? Like, really,
right?
But giving it this very industrial look with the rusted metal border is tough. Right, it is tough. So I think out of all of the ones which you could kind of argue back and forth, and you can kind of give your opinion on in terms of like, well, this is what the card is trying to tell you it is. And even though it's kind of weirdly the most disparate between going to like a grey border and a brown border, which is kind of odd to say, but I think artifacts are the one where you have a lot more kind of discourse to really validate both opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because when the new border came in, going to Mirrodin, that's bright, shiny Mirrodin, like what's the Glimmer Void is like Reflection City. Like, so I think
they kind of messed up with Mirrodin, didn't they? Because they made the border way too light and it looked like white cards.
Yeah. And they had to then change it. That's something, again, we'll talk about in a second, because I've got actually, no, this is literally in this section. Good. We'll get to that in just a moment. I think it's interesting what you say, that there is almost this disconnect of where the flavor of the making them look old and rusty, and they are artifacts, they are objects of old lore. When you have modern, like current artifacts, like we say like Mirrodin, where everything's born to have like metal appendages and everything's sleek and shiny and new, it doesn't make necessarily sense. Yes, okay, it is inorganic, but it isn't necessarily an artifact. And yes, the word artifact maybe is quite confusing because it's saying one thing whilst meaning another, right? It's like how enchantments, to a degree, some of them are quite confusing because it doesn't make sense that the object itself is an enchantment, like Verity Circle or whatever. Like, there are quite a few things like that I think maybe have that flavor to function question. And I do agree that, looking at old cards having old borders, because it is in my mind, an old card and like old artifact that's been around for like say 15 years. It makes sense to have an old border, and modern cards would look strange to have it because, as you say, Panharmonicon's probably shined up. It's probably polished every day. It doesn't make sense for it to be this like dilapidated looking kind of thing. Again, weirdly enough, looking at both side by side, I like both. I don't mind either. So maybe that's again where they've done well. But they were able to denote what they wanted to in the past well, and then the updated version still looks good and holds true. So yeah, again, I think, as you say, artifacts have a bit more agency, even if the terminology is maybe the most confusing out of all of it in terms of like what you're trying to represent. The thing I come to, and I'm glad you mentioned it, replication ring is my biggest like aesthetic fail of like the year, maybe longer if I looked at things, because adding a snow effect to the pale artifact coloration that we have now is just damn stupid. I also don't like the way they did the snow effect in Countime anyway. I think it was a bit overbearing.
Oh really? I liked it.
Again, this is a personal opinion. It's just because it's whitewashing out everything. Unless you have the colours, because everything becomes more muted at a glance, everything's harder to distinguish. And I think Replication Ring's one of those examples of where it's already a very light card. Adding that extra whiteness on top into the border, I think just washes it out a bit more. And that's very much a personal opinion. I like saturated colours. I prefer deep, like I prefer like acrylic dark colours to like pastel colours, for example. Like that's just the way my brain likes things. So again, personal opinion. Again, maybe that washout effect. Again, they updated it going into the modern boards that have a bit more definition. They even made sure that the mana symbols actually had the right colours on them for artifacts, whereas in Mirrodin they're all muted out. Another deliberate choice to mute them out because they're not it's not a red card, it's an artifact that happens to need red to make it do the thing, but then they realised that didn't work and you weren't able to notice. Again, the aesthetic and the function having to inform each other to get the best result. So the last one that's kind of, I think, the most interesting, and I'm again very nearly forgot it, is the lands. And my big question with this, comparing, if the people out there listening get the time-shifted Mystic Sanctuary and the regular version of Mystic Sanctuary, tell me which of those cards shows that it's colourless more than the other. Because lands don't have colour, right? And I feel like compared to how lands look now, compared to how they used to look, I think they demonstrated their colourlessness way better in old border than they do in the modern border. I think the modern border is more confusing than the old border in terms of explaining that it's a card without colour.
Sure. No, I don't agree with that.
Okay, cool.
And the reason I don't agree with that is because I think the inherent rule of it being colourless is confusing and unintuitive. Like I see what you mean, because it's got the frame around it is brown, much like artifacts are brown. It is a different frame, but they look very similar to the artifact frame, right? So it's the idea that these cards don't have a color the same way that the other colored frames do, which is fine. And because the presence of the frame on modern cards is reduced, that visual thing is different. I also do like the fact that in the older frames, the text box itself, it has a color, which is what denotes like its difference, like between a swamp or whatever else. But that's a rules question, which is like, do you understand what a land is, right? It's the same way that how would a creature card tell you that it's got summoning sickness? You know?
True. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, good point.
I agree with you. I see what you're saying completely. Like, it is a nice visual cue to be like, destroy all colorless permanents. Whereas obviously nowadays they'd say all colorless non-land permanents. So I understand that. But at the same time, I think the issue is still around. It's just, because you could look at that and go, but the text box is blue. It's a blue card.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's only when I looked at them and again, it's looking at new cards in old borders that then gives me kind of an objective perspective, even if my opinion then automatically is subjective. But it kind of made this thing of like, I looked at it and went, that actually looks, that defines it as a colourless card. Again, maybe it's because I had them side by side next to the artifacts, and then that's synonymous in my mind, so it made more sense there. Again, I think that they did really clever things back then. This is the first time I think that they did this, compared to, like, say, when we said Ravnican multicolored cards started getting the color of the card into the border. So if it was a red and white card, it went red into white across the borders of the text box and the art frame. Here, yes, they add blue around the. I think it was supposed to be what color mana does the card make, and then that's the color that we put around the art border and around the text border, and then the coloration we put in. Obviously, we look at the garish like the dual lands from back in the day, where it was like staggered, fucking like it's not quite checkered. What is it? That like kaleidoscope hypnotic effect, where we're like red green into the middle. That looks diabolically awful. I think it's kind of interesting that you look now and the multicolored cards have this gold edging to it. I think this is the funny thing is I look at the lands from old school border, and I think they did so many things right in demonstrating how to highlight colors, to add different like coloration. Like, why isn't all the gold colors that gold color? This nice almost orangey umbery kind of color. Like, you already had that as an option, and you went for diarrhea. Why did you go for diarrhea? I don't understand. I think it's interesting that these are kind of the steps that they made to kind of denote what the card's supposed to do. And yes, as you say, even in the moment, it would have been more confusing. I just think it's funny. You look at modern cards, and I don't think it's less confusing, which I think arguably it should be.
Out of all the old framed cards that I would say, before we knew Time Spiral Remastered was a thing, the cards that I actively sought out in old border or old frame were land cards. And I do think it is to do with the differentiating it as what a game piece is, because visually speaking, they're not as egregious as having, say, like 5 creatures on the battlefield. One of your creatures is like old frame, all the other ones are modern frame. That kind of makes that creature stand out a bit more, like to better or worse, whatever. But then all your lands, especially if you match up all your lands in the same frame as best you can, having most of the basics in that frame definitely adds an aesthetic to it. And it definitely works a lot with even things like how they represented like the mana symbol. Like older cards, as you can see in some of these ones, had literally tap to add a blue mana symbol, and then some of them would just have tap blue, and then some of them would just have the mana symbol, because we understood that the game piece needed to be tapped to make that mana, right? So there's that evolution going forwards. So I will say that for my money, the lands are the best ones in the old frame, because they still kind of read as game pieces even now. And I think that is just due to the simplicity of the rules of the card. I will say that one of the drawbacks just from a functionality of the old frames, like another big one, which I don't think we've spoken about a lot, is the fact that especially on more modern cards, putting them back into old frame. But then even then, a lot of old frame cards, original printing had so much of it, is just the sheer amount of text. Like, you look at Mystic Sanctuary does a lot, and the fact that the text box doesn't seem to have as much space means that it's all crushed in together.
That is very true. Yeah, that extension.
I mean, I don't know.
It's
how
almost
much
like it's almost like 10%, isn't it? It's like a 10% increase, which allows
some of them look like Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Like, do you know what I mean?
No, I agree completely. Obviously, you look back at cards like, say, Lich or the Abyss, and that's like, or Icy.
Well, yeah, those are the extremes.
It's the big one, right? Yeah, but you have to kind of spend a day just to figure out what the hell it's saying. Yeah.
Ironically, there were a lot of cards that were a lot simpler, and therefore there were many more cards that had flavor text. So that's kind of a weird flip reverse. That just because the cards in the game weren't quite as complicated, they had more room for lore. But that's a different discussion for a different time.
Yeah, for sure. It's cool. So, I mean, the last thing I want to talk about, because I think it's going to lead into our general aesthetic conversation, is the graveyard indicator. Now, this is something that I think was really cool, and I'm really glad they brought it back. And it was for any card that had, as I was reading through a random article earlier, after a card's destruction, still has relevance in the graveyard. It would have this little tombstone symbol in the top left corner. Whether it was a card that had flashback, they even added it to Prized Amalgam, because Prized Amalgam, it's basically, if it has an effect that can be activated or react with whilst it's in the graveyard, they put the symbol on it so you didn't forget. It was a design aspect that helped the functionality of the card, and I don't know why. I mean, obviously, it doesn't really work with any other areas, right? It doesn't really work with, say, in Exile, because very few things interact outside or inside of Exile. So I guess this is the only time that is relevant, because I was trying to think of other times they could have used this symbol to denote things. It's not like with, say, Future Sight cards, which we're not going to talk about at all, because that frame is a complete other conversation. But they had in the top left not only what they were, if it was a creature, if it was an instant or sorcery, they had a different symbol, so you could very quickly just look at that and know. It was redundant because it still has a type line, but this is a very nice, easy way to check your graveyard and go, okay, cool, I've got 3 cards in there that can be interacted with and do things. And I think it's really interesting that they brought it back. I'm glad they did bring it back. I don't think it's necessary in the current game, because as much as it is a visual aid to help the functionality of the cards from a flavor point of view, Tombstone obviously being graveyard, I don't think it's necessary. People should be able to keep track of their things, even though I don't think it'd be bad. I don't think it would be a bad thing to add to cards. I don't think anyone would have an issue with it, unless they're like really oddly anal about the aesthetic of it, like the fact it does sit in a space that's normally blank. I don't see what the issue would be.
I like that you had a little pregnant pause there. waiting for me to jump in and be like, I have an issue with it.
There was a moment.
I mean, it's redundant. Like, I mean, fine, yeah, put it on there.
Yes,
but
exactly.
There are
That's
so
what I
there are
mean.
so many cards now that turn all of your cards into relevant graveyard cards. You might as well just put that on every card.
Yeah, no, I agree. And obviously with things like Arena, like it gets highlighted into your graveyard as if it's in your hand if you can interact with it. Things like that I do think, yes, I mean, this is a different subject again, that it really does do well. But this is almost their way of doing it in Paper Magic, right? To give you a little help, a little helping hand. Again, I'm just glad they brought it back. The thing I think is interesting about it is it's a way, as I said, they did an aesthetic thing that spoke about the flavour of the card. And I think the thing I like about, again, moving to a general aesthetic point of view, I think that some of the ways they try to give the frame flavour and character, say like with the blue cards, missed. And it will miss very hard for some people, and it will land very well for some people. Something like, say, the black cards. I think some people fucking hate the fact it's got this parchmenty effect. I don't know why, they're wrong, but some people absolutely hate it, and I think it's fine, cool, because it's different, and it maybe is doesn't look the same as all the other cards, so you don't have this uniformity. But it does inform the player a little bit about the flavour of the card. And moving like all the way now to modern times, where we have each set having its own showcase, whether it being Kaldheimic runes or having the filigree effect on the adventure cards, or having a comic effect on the big mutate cards. The fact that they are actively changing the way that the frame works and the way the frame speaks to inform the set's flavor or the card's flavor, I think is really interesting, because they did spend so long between 8th edition and now with the modern frame to kind of take away the flavor of the frame. That it's really interesting now that they've gone gung-ho and they're pushing it all the way to the other extreme, when they already had, at some point in time in Magic, had each colour have its own distinctive, flavourful card frame. And again, planar shifted cards are a really good example of how they could have. They didn't. All of our cards from 2008 onwards, or sorry, from 8th edition, it's probably not 2008, all of our cards from that point forwards could have looked like planar cards, the planar shifted cards, instead of the frame that we got. And it would have maybe been a very interesting way to see how cards would look now. Maybe that each card and each colour would have its own distinctive frame even now. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong, who knows? It's a hypothetical. But it is interesting to think. Well, yeah, again.
So here's the thing. So because you kind of went past it, but I want to go back to it. This idea of each set having their own frame and each thing with showcases and whatever else. This is the thing, and this is why I think it's really cool that Time Spiral Remastered has come out at this point in time, because what they actually feel like for a lot of players, especially players that have played since the modern era as opposed to the old school era, is that these feel like showcase cards to us. Functionally, that's what they are, because the Time Spiral isn't all these frames. Time Spiral Remastered is the M15 frame, and then it's got this timesheet where they've got all the old frame cards coming back in. Mm-hmm. They're showcases. That's how they function. It's just there's a lot more of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
So having these showcases per set, so from Eldraine onwards, let's say, because that's where we kind of class the classic era of showcases moving forward, so the modern era, they feel special because they're different. And they also feel relevant because each one of the showcases, even when they've maybe done it more just for the artwork like in Ikoria, or they've done full frame like Eldraine and Zendikar and Kaldheim, which is, I think they're going to kind of stick to that because that works a lot better. They feel like they're part of the world they're in. They could only do that because the M15 frame, and to a slightly lesser extent the modern era frame, were simplistic, or at least they weren't distracting from the rest of the card. The modern era frame still was fairly thick, especially compared to M15, and it still had the effect on it. The M15 frames still have like a graphic effect in the coloured border of the card. It's just because there isn't a lot of it, you can't quite see it as well. The reason I'm bringing this up isn't to shit all over the old frame cards like I've been doing the whole episode, because the old frame cards do have so much personality. They really do. It's why people love them. The black one does look like you're looking at a ripped parchment over a potion. The blue one does look like some kind of crazy artifact from the 90s. Like, you can like it or not. I actually do like it. I like those colours. I'm a 90s kid. I love the 90s. It is garbage, but I do like it.
Yeah, and, anyone born in the 90s knows it was garbage, but they loved it, of course.
Yeah, exactly. It's Saved by the Bell kitsch nonsense, okay?
Oh, so God, it was Aqua singing Barbie Girl. Good God, 90s.
All that kind of stuff, right? But they were so flavorful that I think the game would have maybe started to slow down in terms of not attracting new audiences. And I think that's maybe a big statement to say or whatever, because your eyes do adjust and they do get used to what you're seeing. So, you ask any Magic player who was like playing Magic at the time, and they'll kind of tell you, well, no, like we didn't have these thoughts and feelings then. But I wonder, with a modern eye looking back, if we went to Kaldheim and it had the same frames as when we'll eventually go to Mirrodin, or when we, go back to Ravnica, or when we went to Eldraine, I wonder if people would think that, they argue that Magic's art is homogenized now. How much more homogenized is it when the flavor of the frame also overtakes what's going on in the set itself? So I think that's it. I think the reduced frame, the slightly blanker canvas, for the artwork and the mechanics to really tell the story, take over it more, because I think they can do more of the heavy lifting than the frame, I think is a good thing. And then we can get these showcase frames, like the parchment on the thing. Like you've said a few times, like we always used to have a parchment in the text box, and now, like, people are going mad over it in Eldraine. But I kind of feel like that's the good thing about it.
That's the point, right? Yeah, exactly.
That's the point. Yeah. People love the Eldraine showcases, and bear in mind, at the time, it was only like 2 years ago, no one was going, I love it, it's just like old school Magic frames. They loved it for what it was on its own.
It's individual.
And the fact that we can, with the fact we can mix and match and whatever else. Now, I'm not saying I would be upset if they did a set every year which had old frame cards, because it is a big part of what Magic was. And I think because they were so different, I also wouldn't be mad if they never did it for the modern era frames. That we didn't get a Time Spiral Remastered modern era. Because I don't think it's different enough. I don't think it has its own personality enough, which was the point.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the word distracting. It is very much a matter of, if the card frame, and again, I don't think we preambled at this for this, but we have mentioned it a couple of times throughout the episode. There is a big thing about clarity and functionality, and just because there is this massive nostalgic aspect to it that can kind of cloud the judgment a little bit, and the rose-tinted glasses come down, that there is a detriment that clearly they identified, and they did for years and years and years move further and further away from this aesthetic, to the point of where there was this uniformity that the cards can speak for themselves, that the flavor of the set comes through the artwork. It's not just a blanket flavor placed on by the card frame. And I guess the flip side to that is it could be interesting to see an EDH game where you happen to have, say, an Eldraine card showcase, a Kaldheim showcase. You've got a Godzilla card and the Mutate, and you look down and you go, how is this the same fucking card game? And it's like, well, actually, it's because of all these individual things, which is what I'm talking about from the whole set point of view. Like, looking at these now, I'm like, oh yeah, look at all of the individual bits of flavor. But that was for everything all the time. There's a reason why we don't do it all the time, and it's a reason why the throwback works. And as you said, if we did it for everything, I don't think it wouldn't deliver as much. And having a diversity is cool, but the diversity needs to come from a deliberate, specific functionality, not just for the sake of it. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Again, the word distracting is so key, because this is a very complicated game. There's a lot of moving pieces. Even looking at Eldraine showcases, I look at that and I go, that's way too busy. My eyes fucking love it, but from a design, from a play point of view, objectively, I think it's maybe
there's a lot
too busy.
going on.
Yeah, so again, if the whole set was like that, it would ruin the set, it would ruin the aesthetic, and Magic wouldn't feel like Magic anymore. So you need the highlights. Obviously, the only way to have highlights is to have a base level. And I think, as you say, it's weird that looking back at this, the base level was really diverse. Everything from white cards through to lands, like each individual color and each card type had its own distinction, and maybe that is in of itself a problem.
Well, it's also good to know. I think at the time it worked, and I think it's because, and it's something that we've discussed in this podcast ad nauseum, is the fact that the colours and the colour identities back then, as much as they maybe weren't super clear on the storyline for a few sets until the Weatherlight Saga started to come into effect, the fact that tonal shifts, like as I said with Ice Age, like was wild tonal shifts across even like a set within itself. The colour identities of like red is this, black is this, white is this, were a bit more like set in stone. Like, black is the color of evil, white is the color of good, red is the color of like doing damage, green's the color of nature, and blue's the color of intelligence. Like, those were a lot more kind of not simplistic, but just maybe just a bit more like, this is what we're shooting for. And over time, over fucking 30 years, things have got a bit more nuanced, as things would be. So I think the card frames need to reference that, and they reference it by not being there, by being a lot less, and by letting the rest of the card speak for itself.
Yeah, it's also funny that Time Spiral Remastered is a throwback to a throwback.
Yeah, a bit.
Like, because the Time Spiral block itself had time shifted cards, and it's like, okay, so let's do time shifted cards for that. It's like, but but that's just like, how far back do we throw it back before it doesn't come back again? So it's an interesting thing. Again, I think maybe they're cashing in on the nostalgia, and I guess, as you say, that there's this way more give or take aspect with this set. Maybe again, circumstance, like life circumstance, not being able to get hold of this, and it's likely to want to have been a drafted in person thing. The fact it's not coming to Arena, there's a lot of reasons why this set might not deliver to the average person. And it's funny that when the original set didn't deliver to the average player, and then this set doesn't necessarily deliver to the average player, like maybe there's reasoning for that beyond just the positivity of like, oh yeah, I really would love a True Name Nemesis in an old school border, or oh god, look how cool Treasure Cruise looks, or yes, okay, now I get to update my Kiki Jikis. Like, yeah, for those moments, I don't think necessarily it's outweighed by the modern day disconnect, I guess is the word. And as you say, for a showcase effect, which this is essentially what it is, for it to be so many of them, it does kind of take away a little bit from it. And again, it's not something new and shiny we've never seen before. It's something we have seen before, specifically a lot of. And it's nice to have a reminder, but I don't think we need to be reminded that often.
I guess. I mean, people are enjoying it, and it is Wizards cashing in, but it's cashing into something that a lot of players wanted. So at least there is that.
No, for sure. I just wonder how long it would be until the next time they do it, or if they ever do it again.
Oh, they will. They'll probably make it like once every couple of years, I think. That'll probably be what they do. The one last little thing, doesn't really bear much discussion, but just because I have been handling a lot of these old 1996, 1995 cards recently, or 1998 cards as well, I don't think a lot of players are going to really get the kick they want out of them because of the card stock. The cards are made differently now. And I wonder if that'll be a discussion once people get these in paper, where they'll go, they're not quite like the cards I remember.
They don't feel
because
the same.
They're literally
it's
not
really
the cards.
Weird.
They are thicker. The older cards are thicker, and they have more of a cardboardy quality to them.
That is so true.
Yeah, which means they wear in a very different way, and they wear a lot. When they do wear, they wear a lot harsher, but they are kind of a bit more sturdy. But yeah, there's just issues going around. There's different issues. I just wonder if that will ever come into play. But
true. I guess
that's not for this podcast.
Yeah, and I guess my last one, again, it's a bit detached, another future episode, is imagine if they do this but for future shifted cards. They do the same idea of doing a Time Spiral Remastered, but they do Future Sight Remastered, and they do a load of cards in the future border. I wonder if people would be less or more happy about that, because I personally prefer that border from an interesting point of view. Like, for me, that's interesting, and it's diversive, but I don't think they'll do it, because, again, you're not cashing in on nostalgia, you're cashing in on something else completely different. So I think that's kind of also why this carries a lot of favour, is because they are, I mean, Magic players love their history of the game, and this is a celebration of that. So for that, it does serve its purpose very, very well.
For sure. Cool. Well, interesting discussions. It's definitely a divisive set. I'm glad that the divisions are mostly all on the positive scale. It just ranges from the people who are like, oh, that's nice, to people who are going nuts. There aren't that many people that hate it, so maybe this is the way to go with these kinds of things. But we'll see. We'll see when it actually releases, much like Jumpstart and I think Mystery Boosters to a certain degree. I will probably not see these cards for a very long time. I did one Mystery Booster draft. I never saw a Jumpstart pack.
Yeah, right. If we'll see these. Are they available yet? I don't even know if they're still available yet. Jumpstart took forever to come out. Yeah.
Well, guys, we expressed some actually pretty hardcore opinions there about something which a lot of people love. So if you do want to get onto social media and tell us how much we're wrong, or if you just think we're talking out of our ass, or if you agree and you want to start sowing the shit seeds into the rest of the discourse, you can find us on mtflavouring at mtflavouring@gmail.com is where our emails go.
Every time you fuck it up. I love it.
Whatever. Our Twitter is at mtflavouring. My personal Twitter is at Andy Manface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon.
If you haven't yet listened to episode 61, which is the multiverse menu, we were talking about this the other day. I kind of think that might have been one of our best episodes ever. Do check it out. But yeah, other than that, Nathan, do you have any final words for this episode?
No, not at all. I mean, again, when people do eventually get to this set does look objectively really, really good to draft. So if once, a couple of months goes by and we can actually get a hold of a box of this, it does look like it will play very, very, very well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Otherwise, that's it. All happy thumbs up.
Excellent. Nice one. Well, all that remains for me to say then, guys, is thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.